my whole lecture with the selfie stick. Okay, today we're going to talk about plants, foliage, trees, succulents, fruit, stuff like that, flowers. That will be our topic this week. We'll take a break from the gesture drawing, but that's all all of that framework of thinking should be in your just general drawing cycle now. So even as we're not going to be doing that, try to build it into the homework this week and the exercises that we do. Trees are pretty gestural since they're living things. I'm eager to see everyone's designs. What did we land on? Anyone have any that they want to share right off the bat?
I did an Anubis themed chest.
Ooh, that sounds cool. Was my little addendum gesture lecture helpful? Everyone saw that one, right? In the review email, the little video I recorded? Okay. Alright, well, maybe in the future, this week you can. It was just a breakdown of like, let's draw this frog with line-based gesture, shape-based gesture, form-based gesture, and then like a combo.
Oh, like an example of each.
Yeah. Just since I didn't really have time for it last week, or it's hard to describe that succinctly. There's something in my eye. So plants. It's a very huge umbrella. It's going to be hard to kind of sum up quickly, but we're just going to talk about a couple different techniques to make it easier to conceptualize and put them on the page. A lot of it is stuff we've already done, but I think plants are unique in their level of detail. There is so much information within like a tree, every single leaf, every single branch. It's very overwhelming. So this is a great way to practice abstraction. It's one of my biggest weaknesses. I always want to put in as much detail as possible. So I really had to force myself to think out of the box to draw plants and trees and anything that is living and has all those tiny little buds and leaves and sticks and yeah. So we're still going to be thinking about design. That's one of the best ways, I think, to abstract is to redesign it. Think about it as a box, or think about it as a cone, think about it as a sphere, and then sort of build into that. This is a cool kind of skill that I learned from Sora Kim. Her designing from, or drawing from imagination class that I took last year. This is our observations. So that would be like if we're going for 100% accuracy, we can observe all of that. Take as long as we need to copy it. And then on the other side, it would be like our imagination. And then somewhere in the middle is kind of what we know to be true. So if I tell you to draw a pumpkin right now, or draw a cactus, or a specific car, or a pineapple or something, it's going to land somewhere in between these two. You're not actually observing. You do have to imagine on it, but you're still informing that with stuff that you have observed in the past. So the greater you can kind of inform your imagination, the more control you have over where this is going to land on the scale. And that's kind of our goal. How much fidelity do we want to put in there, and how much can we kind of play up our own design? So, for example, here's from my notes that day. This is like an observed pumpkin, very formulaic, just standard pumpkin. And then over here is like trying to describe a pumpkin to someone who's never seen one, right? It's just like crazy, goopy. There's no, like if you had never actually seen a pumpkin and you had to draw a pumpkin just from like a description, who knows what would come out. So you can control how far in either direction you go. This can kind of be anything, and this is usually very literal. So with even just trees, we can use our shape language to help us here. We got boxes, we got circles, we got triangles, everything in between. We talked 2 weeks ago about shape language, how we can push things to be more organic and interesting and dynamic, and more man-made and inorganic and symmetrical. We can play that up in a tree. Obviously trees you don't really want to be symmetrical, so that's going to be a big thing. Push those dynamic shapes. Think of it almost as a gesture. Every time you draw, start with where the weight is kind of leaning. Trees that need to be pruned usually sag a lot more, so there's a lot more like downward force. There's a droop happening. Stuff that has recently been pruned or is like very young kind of shoots more straight up. Those are things to observe. Think about it just like a human pose. So let's just pick like kind of one vibe of tree here. I'm just gonna make it up. Start with like an S curve as my starter, and we will build into that with those 3 different kinds of shapes. Let's do the square one first. Whenever you're designing within like a square paradigm, really try to avoid actually making perfect squares. That's like too far away from reality. It's just gonna look weird. But we can still sort of think about like topiaries, sort of like hedges where they're like carved. They're not perfectly square, but they're rounded a little bit. And the general quality is square. So maybe we do something a little more like, it's kind of like a lollipop, honestly. And then something like that, perhaps. It has like right-ish angles, but I'm pushing all those shapes to be slightly more dynamic and interesting. You could do any sort of version of that if you want. I'm trying to avoid perfect symmetrical shapes and sizes, so I'm kind of have a small, medium, or this is a large, small, large, medium. Maybe I want to break this one up and do another small shape. Put a couple little ones in there, but already my habit is to like start adding more and more detail, but we gotta just chill. Within there, we can keep breaking it up. Some more interior shapes. Just adding small seam lines, trying not to break up the flow completely through the tree. And your shadow shape should kind of follow that as well. This is kind of a really simple, quick read of a tree that I like to do when I'm sketching, is I kind of put down a strong, loose shape to represent the entire outline or the contour silhouette of the tree from a distance. And then I'll go in and I'll draw new shapes that represent the shadow shape. So if I squint at the tree, what shadows am I seeing? Usually there's, especially in like direct light, but even in overcast, it's going to be like a strong cast shadow. So underneath all of these, I'm just going to put in kind of a drop shadow. Anytime you can connect your shadow shapes together, it's generally a good design choice. Makes it flow and read a little bit more. And what I like to do to kind of balance this out is have a couple little pockets of shadow out in the larger shapes. So we're sort of creating a yin and yang happening. Once you have that, then you can go in and start to like redefine. Think about what shapes in the leaves you're seeing, what the organization is, and you could build that in. You could go in and kind of define some of these edges with some leaves. I'm just being kind of scribbly here, but it's pretty effective, especially at a distance like this. So that could be like a squarish tree, squared off. Let's do a more bubbly. I've seen some trees that sort of follow this organization. I'm kind of thinking about overlaps, a couple different layers, but it's mostly just shapes that I'm bringing here. I'm not defining any forms. We're just getting some depth because of overlap. Maybe we put in one of those owl holes, right? A big knot that's missing or something. All right, and then same thing up here. We can define maybe some rounder shadow shapes. It's looking a little symmetrical. I can lay up one side a little more. And shadow here. Even my shadow shapes can be rounded. Trying to create those sandwiches. Black surrounded by white. Connect those. Very good sort of thumbnail fantasy tree that you might see, or like a low poly video game tree. It's a great way to start these. Don't worry a ton about all the details and leaves and bark texture. That's something we can do later. So right now we're sort of thinking about stuff from far away. And when stuff gets pushed really, really far away, it kind of gets reduced down to just shapes and silhouette. You can't see that much depth because relative to your entire depth of field that you're capable of seeing, like the farthest thing away, the farther away something is to you, the less in relation to the total range of focus you have, the front to the back of the trees, right? So it's like if I can see from here to here, and the tree is here, then front to back of that tree, compared to all of this distance, there's going to be hardly any change. There's no distance really there that you can actually perceive. When something gets closer, not only is it going to block more of your vision, but it's larger, and you can make those assumptions about near, medium, far a lot better within just one subject. So right now we're just drawing as if everything's really far away. We're not making out any big detail, just big shapes, big shadows, simple silhouettes. Let's move into a more spiky triangular one. Still kind of a square trunk. I'm going to make it a little smaller. Still trying to play up the asymmetry. Just one example. There's, of course, unlimited versions of trees that all do different things. That's already given me a lot of cool information. Within that, I can also design some spiky shadow shapes. Maybe we have lots of little branches that are sticking out in there. You might not see a ton of those if it's really far away. Maybe more spiky, long root structures coming out on the ground. Didn't really do much root with this one, but keep it blocky. Almost like pipes going into the ground.
It's giving like Pokemon starters.
Exactly,
Right now.
yeah. I mean, Pokemon starters are kind of that way anyways, right? You have Charmander, Squirtle, and
Well, they usually do like
Bulbasaur.
round for water, spiky triangle for
For fire,
fire,
yeah.
and then
Square for-
cubes or like blocky shapes for grass.
for sure. Or even like the rock Pokemon are always like.
Mhm.
Yep. So, same principle. This is like great stuff to bring into any sort of design project, whether that be character design, creature design. That's a really common thing. All right, so that's just like kind of the basis. You could of course play with those to infinity, come up with all sorts of fun designs. I find that really fun, just to design as if I'm like a mile away from these trees, looking down at them from like up on a hill. How much information can I kind of condense into this tiny little thumbnail? Kind of fun. And you can iterate and get a lot of different trees to sort of develop into something stronger as you go. So when you're looking at a tree from observation, even if it's like pretty spiky, you can still sort of shift it. What if I was to change this tree into something that was a little bit more square? You just have to think in big bounding boxes. If I put a box over each of these groups, already it's starting to look a little bit more square. It kind of looks like a lizard hand or something. Or you could round it out. You just have to kind of choose what the language is. The texture, like here I just put these little leaves in on the corners, the texture can exist within that larger silhouette and be really spiky, even if it's a square tree. Like here we have little spiky leaves sticking out, even though it's square. So there's a lot of mix and match that you can do. You sort of want to have a primary shape and then a secondary one. So you can maybe do like a big circular tree shape like this, the silhouette, and then put it on the edges like this kind of square leaf shape. Okay, now we're mixing and matching. Or you add spiky to a round one, or you add round leaves to the spiky tree. You're going to see that a lot anyways. I'll remove this just to retain its spikiness here. But within design even, you can have that, like Charmander, for example, is pretty round, and then he just has like spiky tail, spiky claws, spiky teeth. So he still looks cute. As it evolves into Charmeleon and then Charizard, is that right? Yeah. Gets more and more spiky, less and less round as it evolves into like scary Pokemon. So they're sort of shifting the design back and forth as it levels up. So that's a fun thing to play with. Maybe within one of these trees, you could do like, oh, here's a little baby tree, and then I'm leveling it up. I'm evolving the tree, and as it grows, it gets more spiky or more round. Very fun to play with. I love just like designing and finding these things. Our homework is just going to be basically drawing trees, but we're also going to design trees. So probably start with the drawing and researching of the trees so you get some ideas to pull from. All good design comes from a good wealth of knowledge to build from. You're going to learn about like where things grow, why they have certain features, what the elements are, what kind of fruit they bear and why. Those are the kind of things you're looking for because those are answers that you can find in your design. We're trying to solve the problem through our design of the tree. So you can come up with like, oh, what if I wanted a tree and the solution is that it looks like a light bulb or something and has like some bioluminescence or something on the leaves. You're going to want to try and find reasoning within already existing plants that maybe look like light bulbs or maybe have some sort of bioluminescence and try to pull that into your design to make it more believable. We only have reality to work with. Everything that we can imagine is just stuff that we've experienced in one way or another. So definitely start the week with like studying the trees. You don't even have to like research every single thing, but just you can pull out your phone, Google Lens, reverse image search it, find some facts about it. But it's just a great way to kind of pass the time almost anywhere in the city. If you're just sitting, there's a tree or a plant or a house plant visible that you can sketch. So I draw those a lot. So that was far. Now let's talk about like medium distance. Now some more things are going to start to become visible. We can see kind of the structure of the plants. We can see the maybe some of the bark texture very lightly. You can see the individual sticky branches on the inside. You're going to have like more of a three-dimensional idea because you're going to be below it now. You're not going to be like kind of straight on, far away. You're able to see a range from where your eyes are up to underneath the canopy. So you're going to have a lot more information to pull from. You still don't want to get overwhelmed. They're kind of all going to turn into organic forms. You're going to use center lines to kind of build this out. You can still try to use some silhouette-based things to kind of group all the information, but within that you have to start cutting and carving and putting in little tiny lines and implementing details on the edges. So we're sort of turning something that's like this into something that's a little bit more form-based, perhaps. So within this, we're trying to think, oh, here's a big round shape, and here's a big round shape, and here is a big shape. And then there's lines going away from me. That could be the start. Maybe in here, you start to think about individual branch structures coming up and supporting. You think about the perspective of the trunk itself. Now you can see some of that three-dimensionality because you're actually existing in space with the tree and it's not just something that's very abstracted and far away and it's getting turned into just like flat shapes. Really useful tool here, especially at this medium distance, is to use hoops or ellipses. So if you got a big tree, put your center line. Think about where your eye line is, and then start to imagine this tree rolling around away from you. These are all just ellipses that are turning at different degrees. So it's coming out towards you, the tree itself. Just thinking elliptical here. Gives you a sense of direction. And it's very easy to start to visualize those larger forms as like cylindrical tubes or organic forms when you throw those wrapping lines on, or those ellipses on there. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. Up at the top, this is the crown of the tree. That's a great silhouette to kind of start with because it's going to help contain all of that form information that you're putting in there. So I like to start with something nice and clean that I can design and then build into that later. So I still use elements of silhouette and shape design when I go into something like this. I just sort of start with something a little bit looser, very, very light. I'm not defining every little stick. And then I kind of know, okay, here's the outside edge of my tree. And then I can start to design within that. Where are these pockets? Where can I actually see the branches underneath all of the canopy? Group these chunks of leaves that are usually going to be getting hit by the light into these sort of shapes, like so. Each one of these can be thought of as like a cone going back towards the center of the tree. So this one would be a cone and the point of it is behind it like that. This one is like a cone coming in like that. Here's a cone and it's going, maybe that's the point, so we can't see the point on every one. But a big bushy tree like that, like a willow or something, is gonna have a vibe. Not like a weeping willow, but a globe willow. More, it's in the name, globular. It's more spherical, rounded edges. Other times you might have like a, say a pine tree, a Christmas tree. You're gonna have these big branches that have a bunch of needles and smaller branches on them that create like all of these little hoops. As it goes up above you, it's going to change and we're going to start seeing smaller hoops and they'll kind of start turning away from you. So there'll be a shift somewhere where it's kind of like flat. Here we're looking at the underside of all these. And then this is all the top side. And then you can go in afterwards, once you put down some very light information like that, and start to actually design your silhouette and think about how these constructed pieces are facing you or facing away from you. Just gives it a little bit more form information to start with. If all of these needles are pointing like outward instead of down or up, as we move up to the eye line right here, you're not going to see as much information because it's pointing towards you. This, maybe if it's droopy, all the needles are going to be pointing downward. And we're going to see more of the top of those trees. So you want a general downward arc happening. Then it's just like wrapping lines. If you look up at the inside of this, these are sort of coming out from the center towards the bottom. So it's sort of like they're looking into a bowl like that. Here's your center line. This could be, I guess, look either way. It's kind of hard from the inside of something. This would be like looking up. So this is all the underside, leaves hanging down. And then it'll flatten out. Something like that. And then as it goes below the horizon line, now we're looking at the top. You're going to see less of that underside like that. That's a hard thing to explain because it's an optical illusion when you draw something alone like that, but think about that. Where is it shifting where I can see underneath the leaves, and how can I kind of create that inward curve illusion? And it will shift kind of flat, and then from below you're going to be seeing that convex curve. Just like the form design last week, you're kind of designing on the fly these looser forms that are either convex or concave. Curving, lots of like Pringle-y kind of shapes exist in these branch structures. But that's kind of the goal when we move into this like medium distance, is to start thinking in forms. Can I group stuff into large three-dimensional chunks that are all oriented onto these center lines, which are the branches? This makes foreshortening a lot easier too. When you're working like this, you can design with your branches, instead of just defaulting to some branches going left and some going right, have some coming right off the middle and make them really kind of short and stubby. And then the other direction as well, have some going back that are short and stubby. And then just remember, when you get to that point, we are forcing a cylinder to kind of come out towards us or go away from us. These ones are going to be much flatter because they're kind of a side view. But these ones that are pointing off the tree, it's pretty easy when you start with a center line like that to build a very circular ellipse that's foreshortened and coming straight towards you. It's basically this principle of that's an ellipse from the, or a cylinder from the side view, and then as it rotates, we see more and more of the face of it, and it gets rounder. Eventually it'll just become a circle. So instead of just defaulting, trying to draw all these little tiny lines and details and everything, really try to force yourself to construct it. If we observe how it's all built first, then you can kind of abandon the reference. You're not drawing that willow, you're drawing a willow. And you can obviously, if you get stuck, pull pieces or groups that you're seeing and kind of inform your sketch. But what's really allowed me in the last few years even to develop a good sketching speed when I'm like out trying to draw stuff is not trying to copy what I'm seeing, but rather learn what makes what I'm seeing have its identity, and then just copy that and build that and just learn the structure of it, and then you can construct it however you want. Then you can redesign it. So it's really designing from observation. We're not just observing and copying, we're not just imagining and designing with no input. You want to kind of in real time inform your visual language by studying this in person. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah, so that kind of goes beyond just plants too. Like when I'm doing like my sketches that are like what we're gonna do next week. Like these kind of things. I'm not getting my perspective laid in perfect. I'm not getting the proportions perfect. But as long as I'm getting it close enough, I then have the freedom to say, okay, I know that there's bottles on the counter. I don't need to find and plot exactly where those bottles are on the counter. I can move around, it's just a bottle, right? It's just a cylinder. So as long as I can confidently put a cylinder onto the table, I can put that wherever I want to. And that gives me more freedom to design and make an interesting composition. This I drew probably 70% of it at home. I wasn't even at the bar anymore, so I just was going off of memory. I've also drawn lots of bars recently, but I was like, okay, I know there's gonna be like cups and bottles in the fridge. All you'll have to do is draw cups and bottles. So it gives you freedom once you actually understand how these things work, anything, not just trees or bars, but any subject. You want to really inform it, learn the structure, learn the construction, learn the easy form simplification so that you have some freedom to just design and make stuff up. That's really where the like imagination drawing comes from, is doing the work and not just going into AutoCAD copy mode and trying to really break it down into something that we can grapple with and move around and turn in space. Once you get close, you can really observe some of that structure. So this is kind of an older sketchbook, but these are some good examples of like medium to far distance. Getting that general silhouette in, breaking it into smaller shapes, and then I just kind of like to split where the shadow is, find these like shadow groups. So it's kind of like when we do textures and you find that core shadow, I kind of plot that in the tree and then I just fill all that in with the hatching. So all of my texture kind of goes right along where that shadow starts, and then the silhouette. Everything else is just the shape of it. But once we get closer, then you can start to observe things like this. How do the actual flowers come off of the stem? What does the bark look like? What is the shape of the leaf? So that's when you can get really, really granular. All those things together make up the idea of what the plant or the tree is. This is kind of more general for trees because they're so big it's hard to plot it off. Just drawing like a small cactus or something, it's much easier to think about. But for really gigantic things like this, it's hard to think about all that information at once. We don't want to be thinking about this level of detail when we're drawing at this scale. There's no way you can put that in there. All you can really understand is like, okay, the leaves maybe have like a shape like this occasionally, but that's really big even. We're just gonna see little tiny leaves coming out like here and there, little tiny pointy leaves. So you have to kind of make a choice at what level of detail and scale can I actually capture here, do I want to focus more on like the big picture of the tree, the silhouette, or do I want to go in and maybe do a smaller study of just the leaves? Don't try to do both at the same time or it's going to be a mess. The beauty of having a nice sketchbook page is you can put them all kind of together and the page gives you the idea of the tree, not a single image. So coming in really, really close and doing studies of like a single leaf as if it's just a plane, or maybe a structure of leaves. Here's like one branch with all the leaves on it and how it looks. And then here's that plant as a whole, and I'm not zoomed out far enough where I have to ignore that. I can just put together those structures. I only really did one of these from observation, and then I just built this plant from imagination. This is like a good sized tree. It's about as tall as me, a sago palm. And I can't get in super granular and describe each individual leaf, so I'm using a simplification for that, just turning it all into thick lines. But the bark, those chunks are big enough where I can start to see and break it up into an actual built texture rather than simplifying it or just turning it into the outside silhouette. So you have to be choosy. You gotta be very intentional when you go into drawing this stuff, or else you can lose your way and just get lost in the sauce, rendering every tiny little bark that you can't actually even see. Like if you just look at a tree from far away, your like brain is filling in, oh, there's bark there. When we draw, we have to make sure we're not following that process. So let's zoom in on like just pick some leaves. Usually, you can think about a leaf or a single structure of any kind of plant, really. It could be a petal of a flower too, as a plane. And you can build almost any of them out of a modified plane. So there's just kind of my folded piece of paper. It's just like a flat plane that I've rolled up a little bit. If you can design and flatten the leaf, like press it in a book, if you can design it flat, then it's really easy to modify it and put it into a curved one. So let's pick something that maybe has like 5, like a marijuana leaf. It's also the fig tree, which we're going to be drawing in a second. Let's say that's my general leaf. The trap that a lot of people who don't know that much about drawing fall into is like, oh, I want to make a pretty drawing of plants. They look at an image of a bush or a tree or just like a indoor house plant, and then they go plant or leaf by leaf, copying every single leaf and attaching to the stem. That takes forever. Once you learn the basic structure and learn the actual shape and how to just mold it around a plane, you can go way faster because you don't have to copy. You can just draw a bunch of planes on the page and then put the leaves inside of them. You get way more control and speed once you learn actually how it works and just take one moment to draw the leaf broken down like this. Then you can put the leaves however you want. You can make them bigger, you can make them small, you can turn them, you can fold them, you can have some with chunks out of them. Those are easy modifications to make to a plane. So let's start with the big pieces here. Center line, it's in the middle here. Does have to be middle on the other side. Because this plane is curving, anything that goes along it also has to curve. So this is going to curve over. These ones are not going at the same degree. They're not going in the same direction there, but they are going over a curved plane, so they're going to curve as well. Sort of like if you chop a cylinder at an angle, it still curves, right? You have a natural curve. It's not as intense as that one would be, where it's parallel to the base, but it has to curve a little bit. As we move more vertical, you get less and less curve. So from here, going out to, this kind of points out to the corner. So if you can draw like an arcing line that goes to that corner and cut it short. To find that distance on this side, I'm going to come back in perspective, just following this vanishing point here. Do the same thing. And then we have a very subtle curve on these ones on the end here. Once you have a nice structure in place, it's not very hard to put in all the leaves around it. Same principle. I was kind of trying to round on the outside, or the lateral side, and then do a straight on the medial side. So rounded, straight. I was just making that rounded, and then I switched on this side. So rounded, straight, rounded, straight, rounded. Come outside there. Rounded, straight, rounded, straight, rounded. There's one option. What if I do something a little more intense? Start with that center line again. Go twisting is your friend here, especially when you have an intense curve like that. Rounded straight, rounded straight. It's going around the corner here. You can see most of that leaf. Rounded straight, rounded straight. Bend that leaf backwards. There's usually also going to be some convexity from face to face. I'm just going to draw on random planes here, but a lot of times what you'll see is something that has a center line like this, and then it's kind of like two planes. Like that. So not only do we have two individual planes like this, or you could say it's one plane that's folding up, the center of it also curves down. This is like, I think it's like a pothos maybe has leaves like this. Very common house plant. We'll just go like this. Creates this heart shape. But once you have those planes built in, it's way easier to figure out how to foreshorten that curve and turn it towards you. I'm just taking this apex of my curve, which gets right about there, finding that on this side, and then I know it goes from the start at the center line, through that point, down to the tip. And then we can use some wrapping lines. This is essentially what they are, to describe that form a little bit more. That's also one that we can turn pretty easily from different angles. If I do it like this. We'll be under it this time. Stem right there. This is a pretty easy shape to start to draw without the guidelines. Once you've done it a couple times, it becomes pretty obvious. See, we have our central stalk here. Bunch of leaves coming off. This is kind of what I was talking about with the tree, about having some that come towards us, some that go off to the left and the right. Your default, because we are very shape-based brains, is to kind of just do like left and right on your stalk. But really be intentional about having some that kind of just go straight up, come towards you, are really short, go away from you. And then let's put some leaves on here. So this tells me it's like a Pringle, right? We can see the inside of the leaf and the outside of the leaf. Maybe I'll put another one right here. This one's at a slightly different angle. Really easy way to start to develop a lot of depth in your drawing is just change the direction of the leaf forms, not the shapes, but the leaf forms, and start putting them all over the place. It's kind of just a heart that's folded in half. Easy way to bake in some foreshortening and depth. So that one we can see inside, outside of the planes, and then we can also see top and bottom of the center line. So that one's an extremely dynamic one. I've curved it like all the way around. It's just a collection of curves coming together. I don't know that much about plants, but once I learned kind of how easy they're, like deceptively hard. When you start drawing and you don't know any of this kind of stuff about form or shape simplification, it's like they're one of the most intimidating things ever. There's just so much detail and it takes forever. And for me, I was like, I don't find plants like as beautiful as a lot of other things, so it never was attractive to me to try and draw them at all. That might not be the case for everyone, but it just felt like a labor spectacle. I was just like, I just have to sit here and draw leaves for like 2 hours. Like, that's not fun to me. Once I've drawn one leaf, I'm good. But now that I understand it's just a problem to solve of just twisting and bending these planes, it's way more fun. And it gives me a lot of freedom to not just feel like I'm copying one leaf to one leaf to one leaf. I can actually just design and put the leaf wherever I want. As long as you start in the same place and end in the same place, it's going to look like a pretty good leaf. Any questions about that one? after that simplification on whatever it is that you're drawing, once you get into this would be the close simplifications, you have to start thinking about that plane and basic structure of the stem. What is the center line that's kind of running through and attaching all of these folded napkins and folded hearts and folded, paper cutout snowflakes? Like, that's essentially how we want to think. It's super simple like that. If it helps, you can even build a basic leaf out of a piece of paper. Imagine you press the leaf flat. So in this case, it would look like this. In the heart-shaped one, it would be something like this. If you do that and then start to fold it around in different shapes, you can just have your own reference ready to go. Don't copy the reference, but it's just to help you understand the different angles of view that are possible. It gets you really, really far, really, really fast. We already know how to use center lines. That's like week 2 of sketching with purpose. I'm not going to go super far into detail of that. There is kind of a strange margin, though, that you'll run into. Sometimes a stem or a stalk is so skinny that on your drawing, if you try to go in and define like the shape that is around it, you just get a mess of lines. Because they're so close together, it doesn't even feel like a center line anymore. It feels like a detail or like another contour. So don't be afraid to just leave something as a line. Line is really powerful. It's like our basis to build everything else off of. If you are supporting this with your leaves, it's going to feel okay. I can't wait to listen to this recording and have all this rip and bass on it. And you can always, if you need to, reinforce this with a little more line weight, so it's a little bit heavier. That's totally fine. But on a really small drawing, you can't like actually define a very small width like that. It's like trying to draw like string with a weight to it. It's so thin you can just sum it up with a single line. If you get really, really granular, very close, you can start thinking again in silhouette, which is kind of fun. So if I took this and I tried to simplify it into just silhouette, it can be a fun way to kind of group a very complex plant like this into one piece. So let's say I have this leaf out here, little stem connecting, there's another one. That has a leafy quality to it. It's just 3 leaves that I've combined this silhouette into one big one. But that I think is very interesting. Sort of groups everything together into one sheet. And if it's all kind of a similar value, which you'll get if it's very overcast or ambient lighting, that's like kind of a successful thing to do. You could even group in, I love when people do this successfully, but it's very hard. Put in the stems too. It doesn't really have to make sense. We know that this is representing stems, but if everything on this plant was all grouped into one big consistent silhouette, it's a very nice aesthetic quality that I enjoy quite a lot. Hard to do in practice. You almost need like a rep, like I'm having to kind of look at this to design on the fly because you can get ahead of yourself very easily and accidentally forget about a stem. But that can be a useful thing, especially if something's really close. You can play with the focal range that way. Like if you have a scene and there's a bunch of plants in the foreground, you can see very clearly a lot of the detail on them, but that's not your focus. You want to do something that's more in the midground. You can take everything that's in the foreground and turn it into these kind of loose silhouette shapes that have the vibe of whatever this plant is. Do that the same for all the trees in the background, just turn them into big shadow shapes and silhouettes, and then everything in your midground can be a little bit more defined, and that will really pull the attention. That's like a fun compositional element. I really like doing that kind of as like a border within my border, like take the frame and like chop off the corners with stuff like this that's kind of leading from edge to edge. It's kind of fun, it's really cool, and you can also fill it in black instead of leaving it white. That one's really hard. It almost is like you need to build out like a structure first with like a lighter pen or a pencil or something and then define it. Because it's very easy to make mistakes with that. Those little pieces of negative space though are very satisfying, I think, in there. Okay, so that's kind of how we want to think. When you're studying one tree or one plant, whatever it is, unless it's a really small cactus, start with a nice big grouping of everything. If you're in the park or whatever, you just go as far away as you can and try to simplify it. Then you can zoom in a little bit, come closer. Start thinking about the actual structure of the leaf groupings, the branches. Start with the trunk and all the stuff coming off it, that's your first shape. Then you go in and do the middle ground, that's each individual branch. How are these all connecting and what is the individual shapes and forms that these collections of leaves make up? Then you can get even smaller. What do the individual leaves look like on their own? How do they kind of get organized on a stem? What does the stem look like? Does it have little segments like bamboo and then little offshoots? Is there fruit? Where does the fruit land? You can work some fruit into this too. That now also is a thing you can design. We have spiky round shapes and then more circular round shapes. So we have a primary and a secondary shape language within one silhouette. So going back and forth is a really fun way, and you get a very nice holistic view of a single plant all on one page. And this is going to lead into our design project where you're essentially going to do that for your own tree. You're going to make something up. I have a good example in here. Tam, maybe you can tell us about yours too if you want.
To be honest, I fell in many of these rabbit holes because I was so much in detail.
Detail, yeah.
So much, that I take too much time defining the leaves because the plants that I picked, it was really beautiful in detail and it was like really, I don't know, they have many contours and many things. So when I was defining them, I just get crazy because of the details and I just overdid.
Yeah.
But it was good.
What about the one that you designed though? Didn't you come up with one?
It was, I think it was Cordelia.
Okay, right.
The crazy, amazing one was Cordelia. The one that I came, it was like this alien kind of shape one that I
and then Jonathan made the donut one, that was kind of cursed.
Yeah.
It was gross. I don't even. It was like all the like fruit and leaf structure were like donuts, and then when it was ripe, the donut hole fell out the middle and was like all like slimy on the ground. That just looks wrong. It was great design, but you can go back and look at it if you want to Discord. It's pretty funny. Here's some that I did. This one is like a candle plant. So I wanted to kind of look like a big waxy candle, and then at the end is one little orange flower. So I didn't actually draw orange, but just imagine this little flower pops open and has like a bright yellow with red leaves, and then a yellow center there. And then the stem is like a wick. But yeah, so I did like some zoom-ins of the texture. I can do a little bark texture demo if you want. I had like some symbiotic plants on there that I did a little bit close up. I did like a version of it when it's young, and then as it gets older, it kind of keeps shedding its skin and getting like a candle would like droop the wax. This was like, I think I called it heart vine. Those are hearts. Heart root, yeah. So my idea was there's these little like heart-shaped leaves, and I was really going for the Pringle shape here where we can see the top and the bottom on almost all of them. But then they grow out of like really hostile environments like brick walls and whatnot. So, and then this was the Iron Maiden cactus. That's my favorite. It has like leaves on the outside that close up around it at night, and it would be like a carnivorous plant, so it traps things inside and it rots, and they get stabbed when it gets closed up in the leaf at night. So that's like a fun like function thing. Like I'm just asking questions and trying to solve it through the design. Doesn't need to be that crazy or mythical. You can just do something very standard if you're into plants. But I am not into plants at all, so I had to kind of think outside the box and like make them a little bit more fantastical. Those are just some examples. So the homework is just going to be, let's say, 4 pages of plant studies. And then 3 plant designs. And you can do whatever you need to. Like your design process is up to you now. I'm not going to like mandate how many thumbnails you do. But think about how we designed our containers, how we did the shape design, You're gonna start by just doing some thumbnails. Maybe you do some mind maps, try to gather problems that you wanna solve, or ask all the questions about the plant. Where does it live? Why does it look this way? How does it gain nutrients? When is it in bloom? How does it look when it's not in bloom? Like, you can ask all these questions and then answer them with drawing, and it will immediately start to become a very living, breathing design just by answering those questions.
And we can use our own references for the plant studies.
Yeah, I definitely recommend doing it from life. You're gonna remember a lot more, and you're just gonna bake all that into your drawing too when you are there experiencing something. I did want to offer, let's see, what's today, Tuesday? If you guys want on like Thursday or Friday to go to Volunteer Park, I'm happy to also do that. There's a conservatory there that has tons of plants, only $6, and then the park also has lots of trees. So I'll probably go regardless, but I'll just put in the sketch together. Maybe the other classes can come as well. They're doing bugs this week. So, but yeah, if you want to come work from life, I think life is always going to give you way more out of your drawing than just photos. But we don't have that many exotic weird plants here. So if you want to get some cool ones from, you know, Africa or Asia, the rainforest, that's all valid. Let's do some bark stuff. That's a fun thing to just work on. I love drawing bark. I put in the Discord a couple different references. We're going to do a full study of the fig tree after our break. That's one of those is from my backyard. But if you go to references, and then we go to patterns and textures. This is a great thing to do just in general. It's one of my favorite things to do when I'm on a walk, but if it's sunny outside especially, the core shadow makes the texture very, very obvious in the sunlight. You get the strong sandwiches right in the middle of the texture, right? So if you have a sunny, nice day, unless the sun is directly above you, but go out and on your walk, try to make these little swatches. Take pictures of textures and patterns that you see, even if it's just a full tree, about how the light is splitting the tree left to right and where that shadow is, because it's just like an easy thing to copy. I took a bunch of pictures and I've only done a couple of them.
Just in the regular class chat.
Oh, it's just in the, yeah, so references just up above in the information channels.
I do feel like though, like on a sunny day, the ambient light makes it hard to see a shadow, a specific shadow.
On a sunny day? No.
Or not a non-sunny day,
Oh,
just like a, where it's
Yes,
kind of,
it limits it and you only really get like ambient occlusion.
yeah.
Unless, I mean, if it's a big enough tree, you'll have like an underside and top side because most of the light is coming from above. But yeah, the shadows are much less intense.
Oh, and I guess we're under, so we're not looking at that part.
Yeah, so if you get far enough away, you can tell. But even then, you can kind of observe like where are the ambient occlusion. Like maybe you can almost do like an overcast texture study where you're not putting in any of those midtones at all. You just do the hot, there aren't even really highlights. You just do the like ambient occlusion zones. What are the darkest darks? And if you just put in those within the silhouette, would it describe the texture? It's almost like changing the exposure level on your camera. But here's like one page of those textures that I took on my recent walk. So you can get a lot just from one little walk. This is maybe like an hour of drawing, but I'm observing some stuff up close, and then I'm observing some stuff very far away. You can see here I'm just kind of breaking it up into shadow shapes, and then the individual shapes of the leaves kind of sticking up. Here's like a close-up of some berries. This is like much more of a big scene, but this hedge was really interesting because the top of the hedge is like a block, right? But the top of the block is getting all the light, so you don't see any of the texture. Then the back is all in shadow, and then we have a glancing light on the side, so you get the most texture visible here because there's sandwiches happening. There's little leaves sticking out and catching the light, and then the shadow underneath them. And then there's like a close-up of a tree trunk. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for, is just kind of what I posted in this chat here. Those close-ups where you can see kind of a left and a right, or a top and a bottom of the texture, or if it's just like a kind of a super dense like shrub or a bunch of leaves, you can get that layering effect of something that's facing the light the most, and then the leaves underneath it that get some of the cast shadow on it. So let's find some tree bark in here to do. I have like a go-to tree bark texture in my mind that I always can just pull out, so I don't want to do that one. I'm trying to find something different. You can also include like moss and any other like textural elements on there. Like if it's been pruned recently, you have like a stump on the side of it. Okay, let's do this one. chunks coming out. I love bark like this. It's kind of like it's just recently sort of like split its clothing. You know, it's like tearing the bark apart because it's getting too wide for it. And then the new layer will come underneath it. So right up there, there's like a big knot forming, and I think that's why the bark is splitting out the most. So that's kind of what I want to do.
Which one? Sorry, they look alike on here, so I just want to make sure I picked the
It's
right one.
almost in the last.
Oh, I see it, the very last.
Second to
right.
last photo, yeah, before the spiky tree. Yeah, for Adam, who's gonna be watching the recording, that's where you'll find it, second to last photo. I'll repost in our class chat. Okay, so let's just start with a silhouette here. You don't need to go too crazy. There is a slight kind of curvature to the tree, but we're not really studying the gesture of the tree here. We're zoomed in so far, we're just kind of be doing a swatch. So we'll build up the texture and contour later. If you want to add like a little bit of a curvature like that, that's totally fine, but just taking a piece. Really useful thing whenever you're studying something as crazy detailed and intense and chaotic as a plant or a tree or whatever it is, try to isolate it into its individual pieces. That's essentially what we're doing here, trying not to handle all of it at once. But even if you're doing like a texture study, don't do like an entire tree trunk. It's just like a focal point, right? Just take a little piece of it, and that's where you can build your texture. I already know I'm gonna want a better pen here. Okay, the general shape that we're looking at for our bark pieces here, we want to kind of think about the flattest part, so whatever's facing us. It's pretty rectangular and long. That's kind of the big piece I'm seeing right in the middle there. Something like that. And then there's smaller strips that kind of build up into it below. They look like begging strips for dogs. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting, or like strips of beef jerky. Okay, up above we got same kind of structure. There's just like usually a big piece, it looks like, and then a bunch of smaller ones kind of coming off of it. So let's start to build that in here. I'm going to keep it right in the middle. I'm not trying to copy exactly what I'm seeing there. I'm trying to learn the language and then form my own sentence with the language. So don't copy word for word what you see there, or image for image. Just pick something that feels right, has the same vibe, learn what the different elements of the texture are, and then you can put those elements wherever you want and manipulate them around any form. You could take a tree that is twice as wide and still put the same language around it. You could take a dolphin and put this tree trunk around it. That's the goal. We're not trying to copy the tree, we're trying to take the elements of the tree, isolate them so we can do whatever we want with them. Make a tree bark airplane. We want freedom. Over here, I'm just going to put this in now so I don't lose it later. There is this big lump. The bark is kind of forming around that. Okay, now, can I copy what I've done here? Big piece and then some smaller strips on top and bottom, and shrink that width. As it goes around the tree, things get smaller. Just like if I had a stripy cylinder and it was checkerboard. Maybe you remember this from the texture week of Sketching with Purpose. As this moves over, this width needs to get smaller because it's foreshortening. So we're essentially doing that with our bark. We learn our basic shapes and then we start to modify them. Already I'm leaving my reference. I don't need to look at that reference anymore. I know the basic shapes that the bark has. So now I just take those basic shapes, I put them where it makes sense, and I squash them. So I'm going to put this big chunk is going to be down here now. And I'm making it a little bit skinnier. And some strips that are going to be skinnier than those strips. Let's put another big chunk in. Squeeze in a small strip in here. Same thing's happening here. Trying to avoid symmetry. You shouldn't even be copying exactly what I'm drawing. You gotta come up with your own. So once you learn the pieces, it shouldn't be too hard to kind of plot these in. As soon as you try to copy, it's gonna take forever. So. All right, around this knob, we have a lot of weird things happening, so I'm gonna play that up in a minute. But let's get into our silhouette now. This is another time where you can sort of look. Now we can look at the side view of these pieces of bark. Kind of isolating top view and a side view. Now that we know the silhouette of these edges, how they curve up and down, we can put that into our silhouette. You can design big, medium, small lengths. Put some energy to break up those lengths. There's lots of like overlapping pieces of bark right here on this knob that's sticking out. You definitely have to trust the process when you're doing texture stuff sometimes, because it will look weird for a bit and then it all comes together at the end once you start rendering. If you can, take some of that contour and sort of build it into a shape that slightly comes in. So like right here, this is my contour, and I'm pulling it in and wrapping it just over the edge of my silhouette there. That helps it feel a little bit more connected to the rest of the tree. Now let's design something that goes over this knob. The knob is a new form. The trunk is just a big cylinder, so it's pretty easy for us to wrap and change the shape of things as it goes around the cylinder. If we were like kind of accounting for some of the height, as we get lower, we're going to kind of take all of our pieces and give them more of this curvature to them. Just want to include a little bit of that wrapping line in all of our pieces of bark, if you can. So any horizontal needs to add a little bit of upward curve like that, but we don't really have enough height in our swatch here to even see that. But once we get to the sphere, now we have to start curving in all of those directions. It's like a half dome. So it's pointing out this way, and this way, and this way, and this way. We can see that in the reference. I want to just play that up a little bit. So I'm going to think about the wrapping lines that go over this thing as I draw. And then there's a nice underside of these pieces of bark that are peeling off of that rounded knob. So I'm just going to add a little bit more alignment right there. I like having an element like that because most textures are kind of heavy with the information. There's a lot of noise. We have to be very intentional about where we leave off the noise. We haven't really gotten to that part yet. But here we're kind of seeing this unbarked part of the tree because it's breaking out. That bark hasn't formed yet. So this is a nice like negative spot for the eye to rest on this little orb sticking out there. Okay, our core shadow, the Terminator, just goes right down the middle. So we can use that to orient ourselves. Everything to the right is going to be in shadow. Everything to the left is not going to be in shadow. But remember back to that basketball bump thing in Sketching with Purpose. We, in the middle, have forms that are going to catch the light and go into the shadow. So you can see pretty clearly here on this piece right there, to the left of the spherical thing. There's a little ridge on that piece of bark that's catching a lot of light. Just to the left of it is an area that's recessed, and so you have shadow in there. And then we go up into the light again. On the opposite side of it, between the circular ball thing and the center, you have these little tiny pieces of moss and bark sticking out and catching some of the light from the shadow. So you gotta balance it. Just like with our trees over here, We have some parts of the tree out here in the larger light zone. There's a little tiny shadow space. Maybe there's some overhang happening here that's creating a shadow underneath. You want to do the opposite as well. In the shadow zone of this tree, we have a little light spot. There's a branch coming out far enough to catch some of the light. That's all it means. So we're doing the same thing here on a much more micro scale. So I like to go in and just put in like ambient occlusion to begin with. Any dark spots, so right on the left of these pieces of bark, you're going to have strong ambient occlusion. The light can't get in there. Try to connect it all into one big shape if you can. Not one big shape, but anywhere there's an opportunity to connect some of the shadows, take that opportunity. Instead of just having thick lines, we can add more shapes. We can design more shapes. Make everything feel a little bit more connected. At any point you have a question, just stop me here. I'm not doing too much on the left side, very little. Couple spots here and there. The average value should be much lighter over there. And every time we put down a line, whether it's just like a contour of a piece of bark or actual like hatching or rendering, it's lowering the value. Already this has a lot of texture happening. It's kind of nice. Let's add in some hatches now. We can break up our big pieces into smaller ones. This can be informed by the texture that exists on there. So there are like some slightly lighter grayish white kind of spots in the shadow. And then there's lots of like small gritty texture as well. Design where you want to put those. Maybe this big piece of bark that's kind of going over the orb is very gritty. So I'm going to just put in a bunch of small, I'm not really doing stippling, I'm sort of moving a line while I push my arm. So I'm like doing a wrapping line that is spotted. So some of those might turn into dashes, that's totally fine. Not filling the whole thing, I want to have a little bit of negative space in there. Any other places I can put that? Maybe on like the edges of this. If you ever make a mistake or you commit to something and then you end up not liking it, you have to commit even more to make it validated. Repetition legitimizes, so if you make a weird textural choice and you don't really like how it looks, just keep doing it, just commit to it. Put it in a couple other places on the image, don't overdo it, but just put it in a couple other places and then it will look intentional. All right, I'm gonna draw in the shape of that lighter value thing, lightly. There's like one there. Just making it up, but using the image to inform my decisions. We're trying to design from observation. Now let's put in some actual hatching. The light is coming from the left. Doesn't mean I need to put all my hatch marks and wrapping around the form. But we already have a lot of vertical lines making up our bark texture. So I'm going to kind of contrast that so it doesn't just like create a bunch of tangents. So I am still going to go left to right with just a slight wrap on each of these. I like to work from the middle out. because then I can be very conscious of where I'm leaving off value. So I know that there's going to be some ridges that kind of stick up and catch a little bit of a highlight on the edges of these. So I could define that right now, just like literally drawing a line over where the highlight would be. There's a couple of little spots too that stick up and catch it. And then I'm just going to hatch in between them. It's going to be much darker, the hatching in between these pieces of bark, because it's lower, it's like way down in the form shadow down in there. So I'm going to use a bigger hatching in there. Just remember, we want the most sandwiches, big light shapes on big dark shapes right in the middle. So you can kind of like trail off the density of your hatching. You're still filling it in on the right, but you don't want it to be as intense when you get to that side. Not really worrying about the spherical thing yet. Come back to that. Hard to stay organized. So I like to just take it piece by piece. I'm doing the face of all the bark right now. I already kind of started with some of the gaps in between, but I'll just come back to that and finish it in a bit. Just do one element at a time. Make your life easier. Okay. Very little hatching on these ones as they turn towards the face. Every now and then I'm just adding in like a nice long hatch. It's sort of like big, medium, small in the hatching. You don't want them all to be too consistent when you're doing a naturalistic texture. So I'm just picking kind of randomly as I go to create a organic looking hatch marks. Even though it's just to represent the value, we can allude to certain things by adding design elements. Okay, now I'm going to go in and get the cracks in between my pieces of bark. Doing a heavier line weight for that. Really create that nice ambient occlusion in there. It's hard for light to live in a gap like that. As I move to the light side, lighten your hatching. I learned a lot about how to do this by studying other artists. Everyone has kind of a different natural habit, and you can just totally rip it off and steal it from other people. There's nothing wrong with that. Would encourage you to, actually. Okay, let's go and do that weird spherical thing, and then we're pretty much done with this study. There's a very strong dark area in here. This is like ambient occlusion to the max on the far side of that. It's going to be a little bit of a cast shadow here that's, you're just going to copy the silhouette of those bark pieces that overhang. That's in the dark as well. And then this you can just render like a sphere. It's really smooth, it doesn't have that much texture like the bark. We want to maintain it as kind of a negative space for the eye to rest, so don't go crazy with like a bunch of different like cross hatching. Let's just be very, very intentional and roll into that shadow. If you want to like taper the line a little bit. It's like the only part of the image that's not chaotically hatched on mine. And that sets it apart. we have kind of in general these like wiggly square shapes in the texture that make up the bark. So having this nice kind of curvy round shape in there, even if it is broken up by some of the square chunky textures, is a nice rest. If you're working on tone paper, you can be a little bit more intentional about this because you're going to put the highlights in. So maybe you start by kind of plotting where those big highlight spots are, and then you can work around them with the rest of the texture. That makes it a little bit easier. Here we have to, I did it like I left out this space here and this space, but because I'm working on a white background, you sort of have to tone everything down to make it work. I wanted to give this some more value context. I could add some value to the background. Make the lights on the left side feel lighter by making the background darker. Your tone paper's already kind of doing that for you. Okay, let's take our break. When we come back, we'll do a quick study of the fig trees that I posted in the Discord, and then we'll look at homework.
Are they gone?
It looks like it, or sounds like it rather.
Vegan fruit though?
I imagine there's some others.
I'm just trying to think if I like would classify as non-vegan.
They're so yummy.
I definitely have had that conversation with a vegan before, like, well, I don't want to eat that.
What was their stance? They were like, nah.
I don't remember. I think they were like, I don't care, because the bee is willingly doing it. Like, it's not like humans are like, well,
Yeah.
actually on farms maybe they are.
They might be. But also it's a wasp, not a bee, and wasps are invasive.
Free range figs only.
So like, do we care?
Also, the fig would have appeared at the expense of the wasp whether you had intervened or not.
Well, but that's
Yeah.
what I mean, is at a farm, they're like spamming
That's
wasps
true,
into
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tricky one.
God gives his toughest battles to those shrub soldiers.
Yeah.
Those wasps.
Alright, so let's look at this from a couple different angles here. This is a tricky one to get a full view of. Right now there's not that many leaves on it, and also it's in my backyard in a very enclosed area, so I can't get that many good shots of the whole tree. So I found a more juvenile one that's in the corner of the house there.
Wow. Could it be lower resolution?
I'm realizing that now. It looked a lot bigger on the computer.
Judging.
But hey, lower resolution's not a bad thing because we're trying to abstract. So it kind of does the work for you. You get the big shapes right off the bat. You could do it in any order. You could start with the like close-ups of the leaves. That might help define the way you draw the groupings of leaves, right? Because we are seeing like little pieces of the silhouette of each leaf in the larger version of the tree, right? We can see them kind of sticking out. It's not so big that we can't see that. So you can kind of go in any route you want. You can draw the figs first or the pine cones first and then draw them on the tree later. It's totally up to you. I can just take a picture of this before I completely erase it. So this is taken right outside my window. This is right behind my computer where I work. Just sprouting. This is a crazy tree. Like, look at that root structure. Like, is it a bush? Is it a tree? Are these all, is this a separate tree? I don't know enough about this yet, but I really like that it has this big knob on it. Lots of little tiny weird, like, bulbous forms inside of the branch and the trunk structure. The bark itself is not very textured. It's pretty smooth. But this tree has lots of moss on it. Moss usually only grows on the tops of things. So if you're ever trying to design moss, don't put it on the bottom because it wants to get the light from up above. So you could try to break this down into a bunch of different little center lines. You could just do like a kind of like a swatch of it like we do with the tree trunk. Like maybe you just draw this much of it. When you're doing a study, you have to kind of think, how much time do I have? Is it actually feasible to like get this whole entire thing all even just structured with center lines? But again, we're not trying to copy every single branch here. What we can observe by this is a chaotic mess of very long, thin branches, all kind of going around this big knotty branch and trunk. So if you start with just this big knotty thing with all the big round balls on it and these heavier trunks with the bark, that's not too hard. That's only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 bigger branch structures that you have to build. And then on top of that, you just draw a bunch of long lines. That's a great construction. That's like not super hard. This is just a central organic form and then you'd have a bunch of smaller sticks coming off of it. Those you can kind of just leave as individual lines. Then on a few of them, I don't know why it's like only on these little guys, they're like flowering or getting leaves back first before the actual big tree, which is confusing to me, but yeah, you can put in some of these leaves, and here you can really clearly see the individual leaf shape. So even on a more macro photo like this, the leaves are big enough that we can actually see the quality of each individual leaf, and it's not so clustered that it becomes one big group. So this is a pretty good one to study from. I'll probably be drawing this one out my window at some point, because I can see it very clearly when I'm sitting and drawing. Next we got close-ups of the leaf. This is in the ficus family. I don't know what that means, I don't know that much about plants, but I think ficuses kind of have a general root structure like this, where it's kind of like these weird, bumpy, knot-filled trunks with lots of little brambles and tiny branches. Their leaves usually, that's one of the ways they identify like a tree's family, is with the shape of the leaf. So this is probably what a lot of ficus leaves look similar to. It's this general structure. It's sort of 5 central stalks, and they get bigger across the middle. And maybe when this is a young leaf, these small leaves are so small they don't really look like it, and you just have the central one. As it gets bigger, it fans out a little bit more. There's figs. I don't know what a fig looks like. Pretty crazy. You can do a little study of that. Texture study of the outside, texture of the inside, just an organic form. You do a color study if you want, however deep you want to take it. Here is the structure of the figs. This is a very different, I think, breed, or maybe these are not ripe yet, and that's why they're green, but they look kind of funky. If I remember correctly, this was from a Reddit post of someone saying, hey, I just bought this house and we have this fig tree and we have no idea when to pull the figs off and eat them. I wouldn't know either based on this. I saw this looks like a gourd. But these are smaller than they appear, because look at how big the leaves are in the photo. So these are actually pretty small. That gives you a general structure. How are the branches coming off of this, and how do the figs kind of attach? They don't actually come off of these longer things with leaves on them. They grow right off of the branch itself. So they don't have like their own little stem, and they're not in clusters with the leaves like a lot of plants are. Maybe that has to do with like when the bee goes in and dies. This is maybe like a bud that would normally become a new tree, and instead the wasp goes in and dies, and then it does that instead of that. I don't know. This would be things that we could research. Didn't really have enough time to do that today. It's a low resolution photo. It's not so bad when it's up on the wall though, in my defense. But here we can see that kind of hoop thing I was talking about. These are all like planes. You can group these, each kind of layer and level as one big ellipse. So that could be an ellipse, that could be an ellipse. As it goes up, we're seeing the underside of the ellipses now. So this is looking up underneath one of those hoops. Underneath one of those hoops. As it comes down, they level out. We see less of the information of the shape of the leaf, and you have to kind of flatten it all into more flatter shapes like that. And then as we go lower, they all droop down a little bit more like this, and you start to see the shape of the leaf again, but from the top. So that's like a really easy visual trick you can build into any sort of plant design to make it look more 3D, is have this kind of layered look of it changing direction as it goes higher or lower, and you just have to squash the shape that exists inside the plane as if it was foreshortening top to bottom. Then I have just a close-up of a branch to see some of the texture on that. This is that same tree but from a different angle. Nice moss, but not a whole lot of texture on the actual branch itself. So there's a big version. Lots of information in that tree to break down into one small thing. So why don't we start with the leaf? We'll go a little bit backwards. Start with that, then we draw a fig, and then we go maybe the branch like this. We'll do the version of the tree that's in the corner, 0 out of time, and if we want, we can try to do a quick breakdown of this kind of intense one. Okay, so not too hard on this one. It's like a organic form, but easier because there's no real depth to it. Start with that center line. Branch off those other central stalks for the other leaves. Stem comes down. You could group all of this into like a larger round form, but this is not too difficult, I think, for people in this class to simplify into its different pieces. Think about S curves, C curves. We're not copying, we're trying to sum up and abstract into something that's much easier to draw. I'm noticing there's usually on the inward facing curves, like the inlets between each leaf, it's very smooth. And then as we get more out towards the edges of each leaf, there's a lot more detail and information. So like right here we have this smooth C curve, and then on the outside here there's a lot more little bumps and things. That's a pretty easy thing to just follow around. We've got a good structure. The leaf is going to be the fastest, easiest one to figure out. Can we draw from a couple different angles pretty easily? We can do that on the next little study here with the figs on the branch as well. So let's go to this one. The figs on there gives us a little bit more information about how it's all oriented and built onto one plant, or one branch. There's my largest branch, center line. Then we have some sticking off the side, like so. How many are there? 3? So it goes up a little bit higher. Let's put in these weird looking figs. There's one sticking out on top here. Maybe we could have done a quick study of the figs before we went in here, but this is not a super complicated shape, right? It's just an organic form. We should be used to drawing those by now. It's a pretty organic one though, or a dynamic one. There's like nice CS and I lines and like sort of a, especially that one on the right, the darker colored one. It has a very cool dynamic shape to it. Overlap on that one. There's this huge one that looks like a gourd down at the bottom. Organization. That's a big part of this week. Is going to be, can you organize all that information into a step-by-step process so you don't get lost on the way. There's this leaf, put the center lines for it. Here, can't really see that one very clearly. There's a lot that are like overlapped. So before we go in there, let's add our thickness and mass to our branches. Try to play up overlap where you can. So I'm tucking this branch behind this fig, and I'm tucking this connection of the fig over, so it looks like it's on the near side of the branch. Okay, even the stalk of the leaf is pretty heavy on this one. Shouldn't be too tricky to design. We just kind of learn the rules of leaf. So once you get that center structure in about where the leaf is, shouldn't be too tricky to just build that leaf on top of it. We just did a study. We learned some of the rules. Smoother on the interior curves, spikier on the exterior. The center leaf is the biggest, and then it gets smaller as it radiates away from that center. There are some kind of really far away in the background. here that's going to be kind of outside of our frame. Can put some in the background here. Just making it up. Already kind of populating. This is a pretty intimidating image to just look at, but this did not take us very long. We're not even like 5 minutes in, and we have pretty much the whole structure of the image all planned out. And everything is simplified to a degree where we can move things very easily to avoid tangents, to kind of guide the eye more if we wanted. We build and change some of the population or organization of the figs themselves. We move those around all you want. It is weird to me, these almost look like they're balloons. They're like inflating off of the branch. Like they don't really hang at all, they just sort of grow straight off the branch. It almost looks like it was gonna be a branch, and then instead it just like turned into this bloated thing. More of these leaves. The further away something gets, the more the contour has to simplify. You can only subdivide a line into little spikes so small, you're going to lose all that information. It starts compounding. That's how like fractals work. You can just keep getting infinitely smaller, but there's a point where it just becomes a simple line. So that's up to your best judgment about where you put that. Your goal is just to make something that someone who knows what figs look like, knows what fig trees look like, can go, oh, fig tree. And you will be someone who knows what fig trees look like after this. That's kind of the fun thing. I don't really care to learn about plants until I'm drawing, or anything really, until I'm drawing it. If I don't already have an interest, I have to kind of use drawing to build that interest in, which is not a bad way to be. I don't think it's a cool side effect of drawing, but I'm not a plant person. I'm a plant drawing person. All right, that looks pretty good to me, and then we just throw in a little bit of rendering and detail on the figs. Those are just wrapping lines that go lengthwise. You can still build in same concept that we did over here. As you roll around the form, you get less and less width in those lines. So you can play that up in these sort of striations of the fig, make them wider in the middle and then closer together as you get to the sides. Make it look more 3D. Throwing a little bit of hatching. Wrapping lines that go around the form. The hatch marks are going to kind of slot into those. Whenever I have any sort of organization or larger shape that I'm building my texture or pattern into. So in this case, I have these kind of longer longitudinal striations, these like ridges. When I go into render, or even just fill in the value of the pattern, I kind of break up my hatching with those lines. So instead of trying to go over the whole thing, that can kind of negate some of that energy of those longitudinal ridges, which I think are more important to the quality and the identity of this fig than the rendering would be. Those lines are going to be there regardless. So in order to not like completely break those up, I'm kind of slotting my hatch marks in between them. I restart my pass once I get to one of those ridges. And that kind of retains the strength of the ridges and makes them read quickly and before you see all the rendering. Okay, we got a similar thing going on with these leaves. This is really the only big one. You can see this super clearly, I think. I'll design a few extras on mine. So. And there's really no rendering happening in this scene on the stock. Oh, I just realized there's another thing on the back side that I didn't even draw. It looks like a leaf, same color. That's fine. We're not drawing that fig branch, we're drawing a fig branch that's informed by that one. So it's okay, like there could be a fig branch that existed without that one fig that I forgot. So just keep that in mind this week. Don't get lost in trying to copy exactly what you see. I've drawn this angle much more off to the left than it is in the image. That's totally fine. Like, don't get hung up on that. The goal is to create something that is believable and like retains that sense of fidelity of a fig branch. Okay, we can move on from that one. How about we just do a quick texture study of this fig? Maybe a different variety of fig tree. These ones look pretty different than those figs did, but then again, this is the person who didn't know when to pick them, so maybe they were overripe or something. And underripe. But in general, it looks like they have very blunted, like they get snipped off, and they're very blunted at the top, so it's kind of like a cylinder. And then that just turns into an organic form. We can design this. Looks like an eggplant, maybe. Maybe we draw a few here. Trying to keep it asymmetrical. Passive side, active side, more energy on one side, less on the other. I'm going to slice one of these in half. Wrapping lines. If you put all of this on one sketchbook page and like kind of thought through the composition beforehand, it would be almost like a pretty banger print. You could probably sell it, right? If your sketches are pretty successful. That's really what's fun about this is you have sort of a whole page that doesn't feel like as loosey-goosey and random as other sketchbook pages can sometimes. If you actually put some forethought into it and design it in a way where like all your sketches aren't the same size, you can kind of create a flow through the page. Maybe it's 2 pages. It's a great way to just turn it into a print later. You can boot these into like Photoshop and paint over them, or just paint into your sketchbook if you want. I'm gonna get those long ways. Striations here. Make sure my contours are reading nice and strong. Just gonna throw in a quick hatch here. Alright, how do I manage this texture? It's crazy. Let's separate this edge to begin with where I've cut it. So I have like a striation. I'm going to put in some wrapping lines that kind of roll up to that edge. Just so I can get a pretty clear plane change here. There is an interior shape that looks like a spade to me. The fruit kind of goes all the way down to what you call like the navel at the bottom. And so it creates, when you get a cross section of it, kind of like this spade. So we can put that in now to just kind of get our texture going. There is also an inlet down here. We couldn't see very clearly when we were not going to chop it. Best thing to start your texture is to squint. Look really, either make it really small or squint at it and try to find those big pieces of texture. Everything in here is about the same value because of how strongly lit it is from the front. But there is definitely a little bit more in the middle. There's a general, I don't know, like mealy pill kind of shape to this. So let's just break everything into like chunks. I zoom in really close on this, which I might have to open that and have to do. Cool, that looks really crazy up close. So if you squint at this, you can see like a big light area right here. This is all like one big light shape. You can combine all that into a light zone. Here, another big light zone. This is the dark zone, and then everything else can be kind of grayish. That's how macro you want to think to start when you have a really complex texture like that. Trying to learn the language, and then we can just do what we want with it. So in the center, the edges, I'm trying to do like rounded pill-like shapes. That's my dark shape in the middle. Then I'm going to create a light shape on the side here. Do another one over on this side. And then we'll do a couple smaller ones here and there. I think the big, medium, small. Okay, let's start by just filling in this dark. Do like a radial hatch to the middle. That'd be kind of cool. In my gray zone here, that's where I want to put a lot of my texture. So I'm going to kind of lightly build in all of these tiny pill shapes. So like little spiky, round, overlapping shapes like this. I'm going to change the rotation of them as I go around the center. And I'm trying to vary the size. We don't want them all to be the same size. Every now and then you're going to put, it looks like there's some that are just kind of going in a random direction. So maybe every now and then just put one in that's going a weird way. That's it. This is a very flat texture mapping because there's not a whole lot of light on it. Like it's just coming straight in. So I'm just sort of ambient occlusion in the middle, and then like everything else is kind of illuminated with a couple of highlight spots. Might even not be highlight, it could just be the actual local value is brighter there. You could try to find an image maybe to say that's higher contrast. It's easier to see texture when there's more of a glancing light. That already looks like a fig to me. It's kind of gross, but it looks like a fig. Let's add just some little indications of the texture within the light zone. So there's like very light line weight here. I'll just play up some of these shapes that are kind of starting in the silhouette of my white area. I'm just pulling them down. So like here, pulling that down. Here, pulling that in. Very light indications. And then let's also balance out our dark. There's a couple little tiny ridges or like small ambient occlusion areas around the fig that have a little bit darker value. So I'm just gonna find some like areas, little grooves, and just put in a darker line underneath. Maybe an occlusion. That's there's a little bit of like strange bleed happening between the skin and that like yellowish flesh and then the red flesh, so we can also put some of that in. Don't overdo it, just in a couple spots, put that in. And then I'm sort of adding to the organic nature of this edge where it turns from red to yellow. Softening it with some hatches and some wiggly lines. Cool. I've never done a texture study of that before, but I think that turned out okay. It's very like Junji Ito horror. Okay, let's move on. We're gonna do some of the more scary looking ones now, with all those branches. Actually, why don't we do the large scale one? It's this one. Start with an outside shape. This is the tree that's in the corner of the house. Start with the outside shape. You don't even have to look at it to draw the shape. I'm doing it blind. There's the general silhouette. Now you can go back in and redesign that, make it a little bit spikier if you want, make it a little bit rounder. I would not describe a fig tree as square, it just doesn't really seem like it fits, but you could also try that. I gave it like 3 or 4 shapes that are about the same size. Just let me play that up a little bit. Change it, make this one a little bit bigger. So we have some good balance. And then within that, we're gonna start thinking about the hoops. Different layers. The eye line is like right there. That's about where things are flat. So I'm going to just look at the planes I'm seeing and create these like overlapping shapes here. My ellipses have to get more flat and skinny as we move up. Here they're going to be pretty flat. And then start going away from us. In that shape. That looks like a strange gelatinous mass. Let's build into it now. So we know the general shape. We're going to have little spiky leaves. We made this really, really small. It looks like this. So we're going to get little elements of that in our silhouette. You can also go in right now and start thinking about where the shadow shapes are. So this is a pretty ambient lit scene. It doesn't look like direct sunlight to me. But we're going to have a little shadow underneath, and it looks like down in these underside layers, we have all the cast shadows from the above layers blocking the light. So almost all of this down here is going to be pretty dark. So what you can do, down in the bottom especially, we have a legit cast shadow. So I'm going to just design a little cast shadow under here to begin with. Just to tone this up a little bit. Put in some shadow, fill in that cast shadow area, and then let's just start connecting that up into the tree. So underneath each one of these, general cast shadow. Trying to connect the dots. A big long shadow. As you get further up into the tree, it's going to start breaking up, and you'll have less connected shadows and more like little pockets. Good rule of thumb is to kind of go underneath each layer and then kind of cast the shadow of it. So just think about the shape it would be creating and put that silhouette on the layer beneath it. The higher up we go, the less we can see that, because it's all kind of pointing upward. Less cast shadows. This would still be like done pretty lightly. Maybe this is a vertical hatch mark instead of a fully black layer. You could also do it fully black if you wanted. But we had to go in and define those leaves. This could also just be like a thumbnail. Okay, that looked pretty good. And then you move on and do another one. You have that in mind, and you can design almost as if you had already drawn that underneath your next layer. However you need to go about it, use whatever sketching methods you have in your disposal. Some people are a little bit more comfortable just going in. Other people need a little bit more guidance or like a thumbnail. I'm gonna go in right on top. And even from here, I can see a general spiky quality. So the leaves are pretty big. The leaves are going to be flatter and closer to this on the top and bottom of the tree. In the middle, they're going to turn more into stuff that looks like this. Very, very flat. Because we're turning that plane on its side, so we don't get as much surface area visible. Up at the top, you're going to get bigger, wider, spikier looking leaf structures. So in the middle here, very stubby looking leaves. We're sort of going around each hoop, adding in that shape. You don't have to draw the entirety of every single leaf. We're just suggesting some of those spikes. If you ever get stuck or you need another like piece of language to work in, just look back at your reference, grab something from there, and then work it in. So down at the bottom here, we're seeing like very long looking sharp leaves. A lot of these down here are pointing down kind of dramatically. What's kind of fun about drawing plants for me is I love all the construction, and I'm not afraid to leave that in my drawing. But when we're drawing something that's super chaotic and has a lot of noise, the construction just gets absorbed in all that noise, and you get away with having like a lot of just extra random marks in the plant, and it just looks like the plant. So it's very forgiving. Doesn't make me want to just like not be thinking while we're drawing, but.
I saw an interesting video of someone painting like a bunch of foliage, and they actually just painted the entire like structure one color, and then to suggest the light shining through, they were actually painting the sky over top of the blocky color of the plant, if that makes sense, as the like spots where there weren't plant. I'm like, I don't even know how to describe it.
Oh, so they just like did something like this.
Yeah, and then it was
And then
all
the
orange.
Sky, they just brought in
Well, and they were like,
negative space.
yeah, and painting little dots in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that as blue after. So they
Smart.
weren't drawing it in when they colored
did it
it.
in reverse, yeah.
They were just kind of like painting the sky over it to like suggest looking like through the leaves, and it
For sure.
seemed a lot less effort because yeah, you don't have to know where each leaf is. You're just like looking at your shape holistically
That
and
is a
then
great way
making
to think
negative
about
space where it looks good.
Yeah, because here it's like, it's hard to just imagine this shape when there's all these leaves and things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you imagine this shape, it's much easier to keep it simple in relation to the sky. Yeah. Right? So you can build in some of those negative shapes kind of reverse.
Well, and as I've been drawing recently, I actually will observe the negative space before I start drawing because that helps me place the physical
For sure.
object
Yeah.
by looking at what's around it. Because I'm like, oh, if someone's arm's like this and there's like a box here,
Yeah, you used to
and I
triangle
already
or
draw the
square.
box first, and then I'm like, oh, I know their arm goes right around that kind of thing.
That's kind of, this is, you didn't watch it, but in the video that I sent, or in even Adam's critique, since what's that last week? Yeah, from those John Watkins lectures that I mentioned, he really emphasizes like always drawing a frame around whatever you're drawing, and don't just have a figure floating in space, because your biggest shape in any drawing is the frame, and that's something you can break up and design the negative space with. If it just goes off forever, then you don't really have a shape, you just have infinity. So you can create interesting secondary shapes that are designed. Okay. crazy, lots of detail, but it really was not hard to put that detail in there. I gave myself a nice flow and organized pattern. We started with just the big hoops, the outside shape, built the hoops into there, and then we're just adding in this kind of general leafy structure into it. It's a very like frenetic bush, but we have nice areas of like negative space in the underside of those leaves, and we don't have to actually know what's going on. We're just suggesting, we're abstracting. And even though we started with sort of the cast shadows of the hoops, and I was just doing kind of rounded cast shadows, you can go back in now and add in the shape of the leaves in the cast shadow. So I'm just putting in these dark little spikes on the edges of my cast shadow, and that further increases that spiky shape language and suggests all of the cast shadows of the layers above. All right, finally, let's do this big branch thing. This one. So, central stock.
And you just zoomed into a spot you wanted arbitrarily? Like you just were like, oh, I like that spot.
I would do this, but my laptop will be too far away.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So we can just like look at the whole image.
Yeah, if you want, but it also just depends on what you want to do, right? I'm like almost like in between this and the full image. That's what I had zoomed into. So you get to kind of decide how close or how far you get in. I don't know if I have enough space on the board to really include all of that information or the time in the class, but you know, if I was out and about and I got this close to the tree, I'd probably spend a little bit more time developing it. And also the structure is going to maintain the same, so I could design my own tree outside of that crop. Okay, there's my central line. I did have it a little bit higher. There's 4 or 5 other big, large branches coming off of there. 1, 2, fun rule about trees. The circumference of all of the branches, if you squeeze them together and combine all their circumference, it'll never exceed the circumference of the base trunk. So it's always subdividing, it's never getting bigger as it grows up, like with all the branches. So when you're designing your own trees, be careful not to have like a spindly little base and then a bunch of huge branches up on top. It would not be able to support its weight and it would get crushed. So all the branches are going to be smaller as it goes up. Okay. Large branch off to the right. Squirrely one going up that way. Another large one going that way. There is one on the far side. We can't really see. I'll put that over there. Now I'm going to define that major structure first before I put on all those tiny little branches. So why don't we get this loose outline on the bottom. And I'll work my way up. Just little knobs and things here and there. This branch, oh, I think I was going to put that on the far side, but that's okay. I can just move it to the side. No big deal. That was on the far side now. Try to avoid symmetry. Like if you have a curve like this, don't put another curve perfectly like that next to it. Redesign the other side, straights, break up when those happen, so you get a kind of natural counterpose happening. There's a big knob happening right down here. There is a pretty thick branch coming off of that too. Alright, now we can put on some of those smaller ones. There's like a jillion coming out of the ground right here. I wonder what the root structure of this looks like. As far as the roots go, this is a great time to practice like rounding and pointing your form. We talked about that last week. If I just had like a box or cylinder right here, that's essentially a tree trunk. can I pull off a shape that goes off in these different directions? That already starts to look like a tree trunk. To make it a little bit more interesting, don't go a perfect crosshair and just pull them off from different angles and change the lengths of them. And then give them some wrapping lines. And mask. So we're still constructing with center lines and then building form around that center line. I'm kind of doing the inverse. Instead of just rounding the corner or pointing the corner from the vertical axis, here I can do it on the ground and create those in-betweens. We get a compound form at the end. Big root structure. So I can do that on this one. There's a couple sliding off. I'm just making it up. Usually if a tree is leaning one way pretty heavily, you'll have more roots underneath the ground to support its weight. So maybe we could play up the roots a little bit more on that side. Kind of balance that. It's just like a human figure, right? You can't have a figure that's standing like this. They have to put their leg out to balance them. That's just what a root is doing. So that's something you can consider and design. Out of these roots are a bunch of shoots sticking up. If you know you're not going to be building a lot of weight onto these, you can build in some of the overlaps as you go. So instead of just drawing a bunch of lines overlapping, I'm going one step further and I'm breaking up some of my lines where they would intersect. And if you do this just a little bit, you can start getting some pretty good speed and not have to think about it as much. Curve at the top. Then there's some random leaves. We want to work kind of front to back so that we don't have to do as much forethought with the overlaps. So some of these have leaves just sitting right at the top of them. We already know what the leaf looks like. Try to get this at a couple different angles to make it interesting. Whenever you get stuck, just look back at your image and it will give you a couple of nuggets of information to design from. I want the base of these to be a little bit thicker, so what I'm kind of doing is at the base of one of these lines is I'm just adding in some mass that then trails off. That little added bit of line weight also helps it stand out against the trunk in the background. Some really big ones over here. Okay, maybe I'll go back in the trunk here and there, work in a couple. With the knots, I'm thinking big, medium, small. Big one, medium, small one right next to it. Let's add some wrapping lines around my trunk. Keep in mind that root structure is going to help inform a lot of that wrapping line. You had some weird, huge roots coming up out of the trunk. You need to build that into the geometry of the trunk in a way that makes sense with your wrapping lines. These you can just make up. If you want to try to inform them with something you're seeing on the tree, go for it. But the more you do that, the slower it goes, and the easier it is to kind of fall into the trap of, well, I already started copying that branch, I gotta keep copying now and get every little detail and branch coming off of it. That's just gonna be a nightmare. I'll put a big leaf on that branch that comes towards us off the knot. Alright, and then we can start adding in all these branches on the rest of the tree. Some of these I wanted to come towards us, so maybe I'll add another one here. Combine that there. Combine this like so. Definitely splays out a lot more at the end of the branches. There's a couple just like random like horizontal ones. I don't really like that, it breaks up the flow of the tree, so I'm just gonna get rid of those. Zoom in a little bit, see what's going on here. Okay, yeah. Further up you get, the more it splits into smaller individual branches. So we can just split off of any of these branches that we've got going. Put in another one, keep that going. Break that off into smaller ones. Split off, split off. Try to keep the weight of the previous branch bigger than any of the subsequent ones. That's the rule of trees. They have to get smaller as they branch off. They can't retain or get larger. It really is a messy tree. So you get to decide how much of that you bring into the final. If you want to redesign it, move some of that noise elsewhere. Ultimately, that's up to you. When you render something like this, if I wanted to go in, I usually would keep a study like this pretty simple, but because it's already so chaotic. But when you go in to render something like that, really organize your thoughts. Try to do it piece by piece. So I'm going to go in on the trunk and I'm just going to follow. Let's do this little gap in here. And then we're going to do this big root. Just do piece by piece. Much easier to follow the contours around that root. And kind of stop yourself when you have an overlapping shoot like this. You try to do it all just kind of left to right. It's going to be way, way harder to stay on target. This knot, this branch. All right. Any questions about that process? I can keep going here and keep rendering this, but we gotta get to homework feedback.
This is kind of a hard question to answer, but what do you do when you don't want to keep drawing it?
Stop.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
That's an easy answer then.
like the render with something this complex, like the essence of the tree exists before I really put any of the shading in, right? You could, and also like it's still going to look like this tree in an ambient lighting than a direct lighting. So if you don't want to do like a strong core shadow and render the underside of everything, just go for the ambient occlusion, hit the hot spots, call it good, or keep it to a focal point, call it good. But just keep in mind as you're like choosing your subjects, there is definitely going to be times where you do have to just draw the whole tree, and it's going to take a long time, and there is a lot of detail to kind of organize. You already kind of get a pass because we're not trying to copy it exactly, so you can redesign it to make it like into clusters, and that just makes everything easier. But you know, like before we kind of covered this stuff tonight, approaching something like that would be much harder. But this only took us like 8 or 9 minutes. Like it's not that hard if you make it small enough, if you group your information. That's really all it's about. Is you're going to have to organize into groups, planes, and forms. And how can you connect those dots together, and how does it change which one is centered depending on how far away you are from the tree. So those up there, when we're really, really far away, it's like you're grouping all the information into big shapes. It's much easier to think about it in those terms. When you get really, really granular, you're thinking about individual leaves and stalks. It starts to become more about planes. How can I design these individual planes? That's not too hard either. When you're at like the medium range, it's like forms. Like up there, we're thinking in like big cones and bulbous forms of trees, or like if it's like a pine tree, it's very spiky, sharp layers, right? But there's some things that it just is impossible to abstract, impossible to simplify. This is a pretty good example of that. There's like 1 billion sticks. Just draw a fig tree that has slightly less sticks. Surely that exists, right? So you get to kind of choose. I'm not telling you have to draw actual photocopies of anything. I want you to design. I want you to play up your own interpretation of these things. How far you take that is up to you. Focal point is also your friend. Like for this thing, we probably could have just like kept a rendering like right there, and the rest would be implied. But it wasn't that hard to do that. It's like pretty simple once you find the pattern. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes it is like, well, I guess I have to draw a bunch of leaves now. If you start a drawing and you commit to that, then don't sell yourself short. Like, take the time. What's nice though is if you draw one of these enough times, any shape, any form, any simplification, you find shortcuts really, really quickly. No matter what it is you're drawing, if you try to draw it like 20 times from a couple different angles, by like the 8th or 9th time, you'll find these shortcuts and be able to put it in really, really fast, and it won't feel as much of a chore. So at least try to get to a point where you're finding those shortcuts before you say, nah, I don't want to do this anymore.
Do you have an opinion on the, because I've heard both arguments, like, with the figure drawing, sometimes if I really struggled with the gesture, I would take the image in and trace it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? There's like two schools of thought on that matter too. Like, it's no good, you're kind of just like...
Is it tracing, or are you designing on top of the form?
I just trace it so that my hand can like be familiar with the way the lines are curving and stuff. But
Yeah.
then I also saw, because I was reading about it.
But like, how granular is your tracing? Like, this is the fractal thing I was talking about. Like this. If you were to like just like draw this leaf, and it's like, oh, it's just like a lot of information. Would you pull up an image, lower the opacity, and then say, okay, here's this curve, and then I get up here and there's this little curve, 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 this, like, is that how granular you're getting?
No.
Or are you just saying like, here's the general shape, and then, okay, it's bumpy from here to here, bumpy, 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 and then like, that's what I mean. Like, if you're actually trying to copy every single tiny little line, then you're kind of missing the point of like, we're not trying to go for perfect accuracy, and you're never going to be able to recreate that anyways. So we have to find these shortcuts that like break it up into a simple C curve or a simple S curve. So it just depends. Like, if it actually helps you to go in and like copy all the little tiny details, great. Today I saw a video. I was like, had to hold that, my keyboard warrior. It was like someone was drawing. It was like an arm like this, and they had like a layout bond, like a tracing paper, and a big heavy charcoal pencil. And they were drawing over this, but they left out like 70% of the wrinkle shapes, and they redesigned a lot of the wrinkle shapes to like force the form and make it look rounder than it was in the image, because it was kind of like boxy and square, and there was a lot of like back and forth. And there was a bunch of people in the comments like, okay, so tracing, wow, that's lame, not learning any of that. And I was like, you can clearly see he's not drawing like most of the wrinkles, and even the ones that he is drawing, he's redesigning into a nice clean shape. And then there were other people that were saying like, why aren't you drawing it as you see it? Why aren't you doing it? And like, they were mad that he wasn't tracing more accurately. And I was like, what are we actually mad about here?
So maybe the real answer is don't care what people think as much.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Whatever gets you to the finish line.
Yeah.
One of my favorite illustrators is Drew Struzan. He did like the movie posters for every movie you've ever seen, probably. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harry Potter, Star Wars. Like, he did all the big theatrical movie posters.
Yeah.
And it's like
I know what you're
airbrush
talking
and colored
about.
pencil and paint on top. And he had deadlines to hit. So he would project their faces onto the screen and trace the general proportions. And then he would go in and he would play up the light and the shadow and paint and do all the texture work and like make it look more interesting. But to get the proportions correct, he has to get that right. He doesn't need to sit there for hours like slowly moving the eye 2 millimeters and having to erase everything because it got a little bit wrong. So yeah, it's like, just depends on what your goal is. When you're doing studies, it's like, what's the point of just tracing it if your goal is to like learn how to abstract and represent it with simple lines? Then you should not be tracing. But if you're just trying to get to a finish line where you can render, like whenever I do still life homework or I have to paint, I'm like, I don't want to worry about the drawing, so I just like trace my photograph to get the outlines in, and then I paint all the shapes and the points inside of it, because I'm practicing painting, not drawing at that point.
Because then you're creating form with color instead of line.
Yeah, yeah, and like I just need the outlines basically. I don't care. I know that if I had enough time, I could draw a pretty cool still life and then paint on top of it. But if I have to do 5 of them a
Right.
week for a class, or my goal is just to practice painting, then I'm gonna sort out the drawing another time. Okay, cool. I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can do some feedback.